Here's the deal. Jeff Bezos, one of the richest people in the world, clearly has his eyes on space industry. And it's not only about his rivalry with Elon Musk, where they try to decide who's got the bigger rocket, but it's also about the future of humanity. To be honest, to that day, Jeff doesn't really have the best reputation when it comes to space industry. Despite starting Blue Origin earlier than SpaceX, his company still didn't reach orbit, even once. Their inability to deliver their promised BE-4 engines causes delays for both ULA's Vulcan rocket and their own New Glenn. Amazon's purchase of all remaining Atlas Vs and other heavy launches can cause problems for Starliner, as it can have no rockets to fly on, and also affect the supply for other clients. And finally, Jeff sued NASA for the HLS contract that was awarded to Starship, which was cheaper and more capable. That move was a complete blunder that, based on some insights, has burned a lot of bridges for Blue Origin with NASA. Like many of you, I'm definitely not a fan of Mr. Bezos' work on the space front. There are lots of things that SpaceX and many others do better than Blue Origin, but despite the not so great reputation so far, there is one thing, in my opinion, that Jeff gets right much more than others. What's that? Well, let's figure this out. If you ask most people, even our fellow space nerds, how does the future of humanity look? Most will say that we need to colonize the solar system, starting with Mars, obviously. The main push for this opinion, of course, comes from Elon Musk, who is obsessed with Mars. That's his motto that he's constantly pushing in all of his narratives, that we should go and become multiplanetary species. But Jeff has another idea. He believes that instead of living on another planet, humanity should go and live in space. In one of his presentations, he talked about the ideas of so-called ONeil Cylinders, huge rotating space stations that can be built directly in space. They can be tens of kilometers long and several kilometers in diameter. And it's actually a very clever idea that has a lot of advantages. All of the conditions within the stations are in full control. The gravity level is controlled by the rotation rate of the cylinder, and it means that not only you can match it to what we are used on Earth, but also you can play with it as much as you want. Different stations can have different levels of gravity, which gives you a lot of degrees of freedom. All the other conditions like air composition, humidity, weather, etc. are also in full control. But most importantly, these stations will be out of the gravity wells. This means that traveling and logistics between such stations will be much easier and require far less energy than it's needed to launch a rocket from Earth, Mars or the Moon. Gravity wells suck, literally, and if we really want to conquer space, why stay in them? Of course, if we'll be living in ONeil colonies, there are some things that we'll need to figure out, like how to harvest enough energy and use it in the most efficient manner, how to protect the stations from radiation and collisions with meteorites and asteroids that can compromise the station's integrity, create procedures to deal with all sorts of potential emergencies, and finally build those stations. That should be very difficult, shouldn't it? But if you compare it to, let's say, colonizing Mars, building giant ONeil cylinders in space doesn't look that bad. In fact, if we really wanted to, like if we could use all the potential of humanity, we could probably build one in a time frame of several tens of years with more or less the technology we have today. To do that, we could just disassemble one asteroid and turn it into a station. Most of the building blocks are already in space and out of the gravity well, so we need to just go and use them. In terms of energy budget, such an operation should be several magnitudes easier than even the most optimistic scenarios of terraforming Mars. So technically, it's even more realistic, even if it doesn't sound like that at first. And if we're talking long-term, huge rotating space habitats make even more sense. If you look at a planet and the relation between the area you can live on and the mass required for that, that's ridiculously small. And on planets like Earth it's even less, as most of the planet is covered with water. ONeil cylinders provide much more livable area per ton. It means that several asteroids worth of material can be converted into the same living area as the entire Earth gives. Jeff Bezos estimates that such approach can allow humanity to expand into trillions. Of course, he personally may see it as trillions of potential new Amazon workers, but let's leave his personal motives aside for now. One of the things that we as humanity need to learn is how to use energy in the most efficient way. But if we master, let's say, fusion on even our local scales, it won't be as big of a problem. However, the lack of livable area can become a big problem as we master space travel. If you add up the entire surfaces of the Moon, Mars and even Venus, you get only 5 times the area of the Earth land. This can potentially be a very big limiting factor for expanding life. So converting mass into livable area is almost as important, if not more, than converting available energy into useful work. So if you ask me, the plan that Jeff Bezos promotes for humanity sounds great. It's logical, it's well calculated, and it can be the most efficient way to advance humanity in the long term. But one of the main problems with it is the fact that it's promoted by the CEO entrepreneur born in 1964 himself. As I said, Bezos doesn't have the best reputation, not only in space industry but also in other areas. He's often depicted almost as a cartoon villain that's brought to life. And that vibe is translated onto the vision of the future he talks about, which makes it very hard to be at least as popular as what Musk is promoting with Mars. But in fact, it doesn't really matter whether you prefer colonizing Mars or building huge space stations, because the first steps for both of those paths are the same. First, we need to make access to space more affordable and reliable and start building infrastructure there. And that's what both Musk and Bezos are trying to do. Even though it may look like a race between two companies of two billionaires, in fact, they are doing the same thing and providing competition to each other, which moves the entire industry forwards. So even though their visions might diverge in the future, for now they have the same first steps. And that is what every journey starts with. But anyway, let me know in the comments whether you also think that Jeff is right about the distant space future, or maybe you see flaws in this plan. Maybe you have other ideas. That would be an interesting discussion. Don't forget to like this video, support us on Patreon if you like our style, but most importantly, stay curious, my friends.